Welcome to My Boulevard podcast, where we talk about everyday issues from a biblical and balanced perspective. I'm Dhati Lewis, and this season we're diving into fighting for the faith in today's culture, navigating deconstruction and reconstruction, and featuring the voices of poets, pastors, practitioners, and polymaths. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy today's episode.
What's up, you guys? This is Dhati Lewis. I am excited to spend the next 25 minutes with you on this podcast, right? Today is just me. I'm just going to rant. I got things to say. And I'm going to talk about vision. I'm going to talk about kind of something that's in our core. Andy Stanley used to make a quote. He says, visions is born in the man that's consumed with attention between what is and what could be. And that verse, or that quote, always stuck with me because I always thought, like, as believers, we oftentimes have anti-vision, but we don't have vision. Today, I wanted to talk about not what we are against, but what we are for, right? Because I think it's really important for us to understand that reality. You see, because in a day, we are so good about what we are against. And as soon as we say what we are against, people are going to come at us. But Henry Nouwen, basically, we got to reverse this. We got to be about hospitality. And he says, hospitality is you don't do hospitality in order to change people, but you do hospitality in order to create space where change can take place. Hospitality is the art that helps us to make holistic changes, and it helps us to make disciples. My ministry has been built on this principle on hospitality, but you see, it's not the type of hospitality that oftentimes we think about where we just simply, cook for others and all that. That is a form of hospitality. But when I'm talking about hospitality, I'm talking about hospitality being a concrete expression of the Christian faith. It's a hospitality that we see in Romans 15:7, where he says, welcome one another in the same way Christ welcomes you. You see, we have to understand that Christianity is more than conferences and concerts and church services. And so today, what I want to do is I just want to highlight 10 principles, 10 facts that I've been practicing over these last couple of decades, things that we've seen in the Bible, things that I've seen, just to bring about hospitality. How do we welcome people who think we're the enemy because we have different beliefs than that they have? And how can we win people to the Lord? In order to do this, we have to recapture the art of hospitality. And I think that that's going to be so critical. First, let me just kind of lay out biblically hospitality, some verses. Paul reminds us that in the church to contribute to the needs of the saints. He tells us to seek to show hospitality, Romans 12. First Timothy, Paul talks about hospitality is used even as a litmus test of faithfulness, right? In Hebrews, the author calls us not to neglect the gifts, to showing brotherly love to one another. 2 John tells us to show hospitality, and to not do so is actually one of the greatest rebukes. 1 Peter chapter 4 talks about the omission of this gift can be a great cause for concern, and it's not being actually a faithful steward of the church. You see, as a pastor, it is one of the requirements that we have in Titus chapter 1 and 1 Timothy chapter 3. You see, I truly, truly, truly believe that if we are going to equip disciples to be healthy disciples in this generation, we have to recapture the art of hospitality. You see, this is always something that's been challenging for us, and I think it's something that we got to take into mind. So here's the challenge. The challenge has always been, what does it look like to practice hospitality in the local church? And here's 10 ways that I want us to do it. But it's not just even about the church. When I talk about the church, I'm talking about the Big C church. I'm talking to the pastors. I'm talking to the poets, the pastors, the polymaths. I'm talking to all of us, right? These are not just church principles. These are Christian principles, missionary principles. Number one is that simply got to be authentic. I believe that the apologetic of our day is authenticity. You see, authenticity, people want to know, is this real? They're tired of kind of us claiming something, but then us not like being authentically true with it. You see, because we recognize this principle that you teach what you know, but you reproduce who you really are, right? People are not impressed that they get the same things that you get. Like, they got a car, you got a car, but you say, thank you, Jesus. And it was like, well, I got a car because I worked hard. They're not impressed with that. And so we got to understand that. Number two is be vulnerable. Transparency is not enough. We are transparent when we try to act like we know one another, but we don't give them anything that really can hurt us. Vulnerability is what God is calling us to. Being vulnerable means I'm going to share some things with you that can hurt me. You can use to hurt me. And I think that is what people do, because we're not getting our, accolades based upon their perception of me. We get them from Christ. Be communal. As believers, we have to make a visible and tangible expression of the gospel. I love what Mark Dever says about this. He says that the church, or Christians that gather, is the gospel made visible. You see, I'm married. My wife and I were married. We have 6 of our children. And back when we were young, we used to walk around the mall or walk around the place, and people used to ask 2 questions that I knew that I was going to get every single time the 8 of us were out. 2 questions. The first one was this: are they all yours? That's the first one. And the second one was, how do you get them to obey or love one another? You see, the Bible says that the world will know you're my disciples because of your love for one another. And that's the thing. Oftentimes we have to be hospitable, not just as lone rangers, but we got to bring people together as believers and invite them into our space. One time we had a group of people who literally at our church got our apartment together, and they said, we're going to invite one non-believer into our apartment just so that they can see a concrete expression of Christian love. And they just were being hospitable, right? And that person came to know the Lord. It reminds me of the quote from Total Church where it says, people are converted to the Christian community before they are converted to the Christian God. You see, I think that's very biblical. The Bible puts it this way. He says, let them see your good deeds on earth, but glorify God who's in heaven. You see, we have to go from finding a person of peace to becoming the person of peace. We got to be able to allow people we got to welcome people into our spaces and then show them Jesus. Which leads me to my 4th one. We got to be relational. We have to invite people into relationship, not simply time and space. Too many of us have reduced our Christianity to conferences, to concerts, to church services, right? Just think about it this way, that in a cold and dark place, what do you think we need? Do we need a light pole, or do we need a space heater? You see, in a cold and dark place, a light pole produces light, but we're still cold. A space heater produces heat, but I'm still blind. I'm still in the dark. What we need is a bonfire. We need something that's both going to produce both light and warmth. And that's the same thing with hospitality. As we proclaim Christ, we also need to provide relationship and love. And that's the reason why we got to present to shrink our world. And that's number 5. We got to attempt to shrink our world by being present. Dr. Carl Ritz, my mentor, used to always say 90% of ministry is just simply showing up. I've recognized that a problem is not a real problem until it's our problem. And something doesn't become my problem unless through relationship or through proximity. We got to start having real conversations and relationship with people, and we got to start being around people in real ways.
We're taking a quick break in this episode to invite you to the My Boulevard Conference. Join us October the 17th through the 19th in exploring what it means to live local and to become responsible of where you live, work, and worship. Embrace the beauty and the diversity of your boulevard that God has called you to. This conference is a great opportunity to be equipped through contextualized content and to cultivate community. We'll have great speakers, breakout sessions, a live good culture show, and lots more. For more information and to register, visit myblvdcon.co. Now let's get back to our episode.
Which leads me to the next one. It tells me to be intentional, right? When we talk about being intentional, it really means for us to do both the short term being intentional and the long term intentional. When I think about being intentional, I think about one of my neighbors. When I think about my neighbor, one of the things that we used to say, this neighbor did not love Jesus. She hated Jesus. They hated everything Christian. She even went on as far to have a sign on her doorpost and said, "Do not proselytize." And it's had an X between a person with a Bible, walking on. And, and so she was this anti-Christian. And I just remember during that time, my neighbor was next door. And, I was just like, if she's going to be explicit, I want to be explicit. So I was like, hey, I just want you to know that we're Christians and, I'm a pastor of a church and all that. I didn't want to go and do like the bait and switch type of things. I want to be very explicit. I want to be very intentional about that. But you see, but it's in there. What I didn't do was I started just kind of dismissing myself from them. We were very intentional and eventually built a relationship with them, to the point where they had keys to our house and we had keys to their house and everything. And one time we went over to their house, and I'll never forget this. We went over, and one of my daughters at that time basically said to her, and says, "Hey, does this thing or this post mean you don't like us?" Remember the sign on her doors. Does this mean you don't like us? And she was like, no, it's not that I don't like it, but people be shoving their opinions and their, and their beliefs down your throat. And I just want, so she just started hemming and hawing and all of that. And it just was one of those things. But I'll never forget, let's just say a month went by. I don't know exact time, but a month went by. I remember we went back and we ate dinner at their house again. And I remember seeing the sign, and that same sign, it was still up, and it was said, "Do not proselytize." And then she wrote on the door, "Unless you're the nice neighbors next door." And I thought that was just so amazing. And I think oftentimes we as believers are not intentional enough in doing that. We're kind of like, oh, like we shake the dust off our feet. We just like, oh, it's okay. It's okay. I preach the gospel to them. They're not listening. So we're going on our own merry way. But no, we got to celebrate the wins, right? And I was very intentional about like doing things. Anytime people were over our house, we would invite people over the house with us. And so be intentional, which leads me to number 8. Number 8 is we got to treat people like people, not a project. I think too many of us treat people like projects. Like, it's that, again, it's a misinterpretation of that shake the dust off our feet. And we just like, we say, I preach the gospel, I'm done. Instead of like, no, people, they're human beings. And so one of the things that I constantly teach my children, my youth, my teenagers, myself, my church, is 2 things. I say, 1, people are people. And 2, everybody has a story. And if you understand people's story, you will be able to see people as people. You won't see them simply as a project or someone just to be won to the faith. You'll see them as someone that God genuinely loves, and he has been writing a story in their lives. And that's really what we have to understand, is that we have to treat people with that same dignity, that same honor, that same respect, in the same way God sees them. So we got to be genuine. When we do that, we got to genuinely want to know the people. Would you still be their friends if they don't accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior? And I think the answer ought to be yes. Yes, I will still want to be your friend, right? So we got to be genuine, which leads me to the 9th one. It means we also got to be explicit. I'm not talking about hiding who you are. I'm not talking about even suppressing who we are. We are Christian. We are Christ followers. And so oftentimes I say we have to be explicitly Christian, but intentionally relational. Remember, we talked about intentional last time. We got to be explicitly Christian, but intentionally relational. I'm about to step on a couple of toes for a minute. How many of you guys out there was a part of these pyramid schemes, right? How many of you are selling or have sold Primerica, right? And, I love it. We've been with Primerica for many, many years. So it's nothing against Primerica. We are actually participants of Primerica in the sense of we had life insurance from there. But here's the thing. This is my point in this matter. I remember like when you have those friends that are in some type of like pyramid scheme or a way that, if they get more people and you get more people, that you was always like, oh man, this is going to be weird. So I would get a friend, hypothetically, let's say friend X would call me and friend X would say, hey, Dhati, I'm a part of this new thing. And I just wanted to know if I would be able to get some time with you so that I can, share with you about this new reality that I'm a part in. And you're just like, nah, I'm good. I'm good with that. You just be making up stuff, but you just know I can't do that. And it was like, no, it's just, won't you just do it? I just want to practice and, it'd be great. And you're just like, oh, okay. So you end up saying, I'll do it. And you are dreading that meeting. You're hating that meeting. You're already figuring out how to get out of that meeting. And the meeting finally comes. And I remember you get to that meeting, and at that meeting, they're going through their spiel, their presentation, and you're just thinking about all the ways to letting them down softly. You're thinking about all the ways of, all right, I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna say that, and then, right? But here's what happens. The reason why you're thinking about all that, because you know if you turn them down, your friendship is never gonna be the same. And I think that is what ends up happening, is that as soon as you turn them down, your friendship is never the same. And that's what happens with so many of us as Christians, is that we claim to be friends with certain people. We get to that point, we build up, we finally present the gospel to them. If they accept, then we're like, praise the Lord, great, good. But if they reject at the time, or they don't, take hold of it, heed of it, then our relationship dynamics change, and we basically, quote unquote, shake the dust off our feet and we move on to the next. And I think that is not good for us as believers. And so we need to be explicit in our Christian faith, but intentional in our relationship. I used to tell my neighbor next door, I says, hey, I want you to know that I want to move into the city, but the only reason why I'm staying here is because I wanted you to come to know Jesus. Yeah, I used to say these things to him, it's because we built that type of relationship over the years that we were there together. So just be explicitly Christian, but intentionally relational. How do you invite them into time? How do you invite them into relationship, not time and space, right? Which leads me to the final thing. Be strategic. Whenever you are trying to be hospitable, you have to think strategically. I think that is so critical. What do I mean by strategic? Whenever you think about it, think about win-win scenarios. Think about finding common ground, places that you're already going to be. Places like intersection. Think intersection, not addition, right? I'm thinking about all of those things that we have. So, for instance, when we came into here in the fourth ward, and it was just like we want to reach our neighbors here in the fourth ward, we was just like, number one, what is one thing that everybody in the fourth ward wants to win in? And we just started brainstorming. We were thinking, and at the end of the day, we said the school system. In the fourth ward, we had one public elementary school in the whole neighborhood, only one at the time, public elementary. And so we was just like, it was the only public school. So it was like, that is it. That's what we have to focus in on, because we said it's a win for those who are sending their kids to the neighborhood because their kids are in the neighborhood, but it's also a win for those that are gentrifiers and that are here in the neighborhood. It's a win for them. Why? Because their housing value is tied to that. And so we ultimately says, like, what's a win-win scenario? So we said it's the school system. We all want better schools because it all benefits. And so when there's always that situation where you can find that common ground where it's a win for everybody and anybody in our lives. And so we got to be able to find those situations. And so that's what we did. And so what we would do is that we would all volunteer at the school, and we had people who didn't have kids in the school, and all different types of people all coming to the school because we all wanted a better school, and we all wanted to produce. And so those are the types of ways that we found common ground. And now, even to this day, it was one of the things that has allowed us to shift from finding a person of peace to becoming a person of peace in this neighborhood, is just by simply embracing hospitality. So these are the 10 things. These are the 10 things that I've talked about and when it comes to being hospitable, right? And none of them have to do with anything about cooking. You can do most of those things with cooking and bring in meals and all of that, but all of those 10 steps has nothing to do with cooking. So you don't have to be a good cook in order to be hospitable, right? Ultimately, all you have to do is this. You have to live your life in such a way that demands a gospel explanation. That's what it's about. All right, y'all. So that's all I have for you today. Look back over here. These will hopefully be in the show notes down below, and you can see all 10 of these principles that we have. So appreciate you guys. Love you. Until next time. Peace.
Thank you for listening to the My Boulevard podcast. And be sure to rate, share, and subscribe. And don't miss the My Boulevard Conference to be equipped to make disciples where you live, work, and worship. We're only able to continue equipping leaders through contextualized content and cultivated community because of the generosity of supporters like you. To give and to help fuel the mission, visit us at MyBLVD.co.